Gunsmoke and Heartache, Book 2, Part 2 of the trilogy, a Western romance novella written by Lila Dawson.
Chapter 1. Edward Oliver. The train's whistle cut through the air, dispelling the brief calm that had allowed me to nod off. Coal smoke hung thick in the compartment, sharp and bitter, clinging to my clothes and settling in the back of my throat. Telegraph poles flickered past the window in steady rhythm, the countryside blurring together as each mile carried us closer to Silver City. From my youth, I had a habit of checking the gun in my belt whenever I felt nervous, even though it had been years since I'd last carried one. Eddie Hall used a gun to solve every problem he ever had. Tom Rowland used it only when necessary. Edward Oliver, the man I am now, wanted no part of it at all. All three were me. I'd buried the first two as carefully as a man hides something he never wants unearthed. It was never the fault of the gun, but it was a tool I never wanted to hold again. "You're doing it again," Harold said from across the compartment, empty except for us. "What's that?" I asked. "Checking your hip." Or thinking about jumping. He grinned, clearly trying to lighten the mood, but my stomach was in enough knots that no one could untie it. Harold was several years younger than me, but that was hard to guess from his confident appearance. He'd foolishly front-loaded all his bad decisions into the early part of his life, but at least he'd stopped in time to learn. Otherwise, Harold Oliver wouldn't be on the train with me today. Then again, if it wasn't for him, there wouldn't be an Edward Oliver on the train either. I felt like an imposter in my expensive tailored suit, as though I'd stolen both it and the life that came with it. Then again, that wasn't all that far from the truth. "Just a little nervous is all," I said. "Take it from me. A lot of these businessmen are more ruthless than the average outlaw. If they see you're nervous, they'll circle you like wolves around a wounded rabbit." "I'll have it under control by the time we get off the train," I said, hoping it was the truth. "Ed," he sighed and his tone softened. "We don't have to do this. I know what you're going to say, but you already did more to try to save that woman than most men would do for any woman in their lifetime. Wasn't enough." The words came out too fast and I nearly choked on them. Harold opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. The next few minutes passed in silence, the train carrying us forward whether either of us was ready or not. "We can at least have some fun while we're there. Father did tell us to treat this like a normal business matter, and let me tell you, I get up to a lot on these business trips. Silver City has a lot to offer. Gambling, shows, and very, very fine-looking women of extremely negotiable virtue." "Harold?" "What?" "I'm better, but I don't have to completely abstain, do I?" "You probably should abstain. The only one with more negotiable morals than these women you're referring to is you when you're around them." Harold laughed, raising his hands. "Brother, you cut deep. But you tell no lies." The train began to slow, and Silver City finally started to come into view. It was deceptive at first, but I quickly realized just how large this place was. Everything looked like it was built to last. The streets wide enough for 4 buggies to pass without difficulty. It wasn't just wealth, it was permanence. The kind of place men like Eddie Hall or Tom Rowland were never meant to survive. Edward Oliver, maybe. Everywhere I looked, women wore gaudy dresses, and men wore fine suits. I no longer felt overdressed. I felt my jaw tighten again. Harold reached over and grabbed my shoulder. "Remember, we're here on business. Officially, only business." "Just business," I repeated. As the train slowed to a stop, I picked up the cane propped against my seat and stood slowly, bracing for the familiar surge of pain that always came when I'd been sitting for too long. By now, it had healed as much as it ever would. As Harold often reminded me, I ought to feel thankful I could even walk at all. "Ready?" Harold asked. I nodded, taking a few deep breaths to put on the mask I'd need for the duration of the trip. When we stepped off the train, a well-dressed young man greeted us. Probably not a day over 20. "Are you the Oliver brothers?" he asked. My first instinct was to be suspicious, but Harold clearly expected this. "That's us," he said, extending his hand to the young man. "You're from the hotel?" "Yes, sir. Henry Hotel, finest in the city. I've been sent to collect your luggage. We have a carriage waiting." He gestured to the carriage, then took the bags from Harold's hands. Henry Hotel. Now, that was a name I hadn't heard in a while, though I liked the other Henry brother a great deal more than I did this one. This entire city was built on Robert Henry's fortune, Tabitha's father. A fortune inherited, not earned. One that should have belonged to his brother, or at the very least, to both of them. "Mr. Oliver?" the young man asked, gently nudging me from my trance as I took in the true weight of my surroundings. "This way, please." I followed him to the carriage where Harold was already sitting. The young man took my arm and assisted me to the step, then again to my seat. In the early days of dealing with this injury, I was stubborn. I got angry any time anyone tried to help me with anything. But Gerald Oliver once told me something very important. Wealthy people rarely turn down anything offered freely. Funny, when I thought about it, I realized just how true that was. It was always the poor who were too proud to accept help. "Thank you," I said to the boy as I sat next to Harold. The driver and young man were far enough in front of us that we could speak quietly without them hearing once we began moving. "What's the plan?" Harold asked. "Plan's still the same. We check into the hotel, rest, maybe go out later. Tomorrow we feel out the business situation. I'll follow your lead there." "Thinking of maybe trying to get a glimpse of Tabitha tonight?" My jaw tightened. I didn't answer right away. After more than 2 years, I was eager to do just that. However, I knew Harold was testing me to see if my patience was holding, and he was right to. "I'm not going to mess this up. We'll take our time. We'll be meeting with Belle, so I'll see her soon enough." The Henry Hotel was a short ride, but I suppose it made sense that it would be near the train station. It was a fairly large structure with decorative features that reminded me of some old Greek architecture I'd remembered seeing in an art piece. Even the grunts here seemed to be doing well for themselves. I'd yet to see a scruffy face or a bad haircut. A different man greeted us, and Harold quickly passed a generous tip to the boy who'd taken our luggage and escorted us here. "Hotel's not bad," Harold said, elbowing the new man who greeted us. "I guess I've seen better, but not bad." I was fairly certain that he'd not seen better, but Harold never wasted an opportunity to tease someone he'd just met. We were guided to our room, where our luggage was already waiting. I wasted no time sitting on the bed, testing it out. Before I became an Oliver, this bed would have been one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen in my life. Now, my eyes wandered to the mirror facing me. Sometimes it was jarring to see my own face. The last couple of years had aged me quite a bit. The lines were harder on my face at 34 than on most men at 40. I likely looked Belle's age, or at least how I imagined Frederick Bell might look. I'd never met the man. The scar that ran across the edge of my forehead went nearly an inch into my hairline. It was prominent, and I was almost proud of it for reasons I couldn't share. Not many survive being shot in the head. Still, the change, though hard won, was something I was proud of. A little more than a decade ago, as Eddie Hall, I'd have ridden in here, walked through Bell's door, shot him, taken Tabitha by the arm, and run with her. I was a fool, and I behaved like one. She wouldn't have loved that man. He would have mistaken violence for love, and love for possession. I could only hope she might love this one. just as she tried to love me when I was Tom Rowland, a ranch hand.
Chapter 2. Tabitha Bell. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the morning light creep across Silver City. From up here, the city looked almost peaceful, ugly but orderly. Looking out was always better than looking in, where nothing ever changed. "Mrs. Bell, your breakfast is ready." Camilla's voice pulled me from the window. I turned to find her standing in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression carefully neutral. She'd been with me for 2 years now, and we'd both learned to be more comfortable around one another, more genuine, though we both kept up our acts and wore our masks around others. "Is he angry?" I asked. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "When is he not?" Her English suddenly became perfect when the door closed, a language you'd think she could barely speak in front of Frederick. "I suppose you have a point," I said. "Benjamin spit up on his shirt this morning. He believes you may not be feeding him or burping him properly." I rubbed my forehead, pinching the bridge of my nose. A baby spat up. That's what babies did. Yet, every imperfection was seen as a shortcoming of the mother. Compliance, I'd learned, was sometimes the quickest way to keep the day from getting worse, and I chose it deliberately. I walked to the vanity, checking my reflection. The bruises on my left arm had begun to fade into a sickly yellowish green, which meant I was likely overdue for more. He rarely struck me, though he was not above it. His favorite way of getting my attention was to grab my arm. "Your hair's gotten so long, shall I braid it for you?" Camilla asked. "Frederick prefers it long and loose. He hates when I put it in a bun or braid it." "I can play dumb," Camilla said with a wink. "Mr. Bell already believes all women are dumb, especially us Mexicans, so it should be easy enough. I'll just say, I misunderstood." I smiled. One might expect a woman to be miserable in Camilla's position, but I'd learned she very much enjoyed playing this game with Frederick. "No, let's both avoid the trouble, though I would appreciate it if you could help me brush it." She picked up my comb and stood behind me, gently brushing out my hair. Mr. Bell also received word that the Oliver brothers have arrived. As you can imagine, he's quite worked up about it. He's been courting a business arrangement with them for years, though they are notoriously difficult to negotiate with. I sighed. When does he wish to meet with them? Have they brought their own wives? Both Oliver brothers are unmarried. One of them has quite the reputation for being a womanizer and drunk. I know very little of the other. As for meeting them, he's planning to invite them to an impromptu and informal dinner tonight with some of his associates. I expected them to meet tomorrow, but Mr. Bell doesn't appear to be wasting any time in buttering them up before the more formal meetings that are likely to happen in the weeks to come. Of course, he'll expect you to attend as an ornament for his arm. My husband does love his image as a family man. It wasn't only that. He also thought very highly of my appearance, but only as another tool to leverage. Not because he appreciated it as a man, or, God forbid, an actual lover. That's what Camilla meant. "I suppose I'll need to choose a dress," I said, stepping over to my wardrobe. Camilla carefully put down my brush and followed. I had more dresses now than I'd owned in my entire life, even as a Henry daughter who could only ever look her best. Back home, at least some of them I'd picked out myself. Here, Frederick had my measurements taken and selected each one himself, often remarking I had strangely plain tastes for a woman from a wealthy family. The blue one would be a good choice. It's one of Mr. Bell's favorites and also would go very well with your long white gloves. I looked down at my arm, right, to cover the bruise. "An appropriate choice," I said. She nodded and took out the dress. "I'll have it pressed and ready for tonight." You should probably join Frederick for breakfast soon." She quickly left, and I took a moment to mentally prepare myself for whatever awaited me downstairs. With a deep breath, I left. "There she is," Frederick said from his seat at the dining room table, his voice warm as he played with Benjamin on his lap. "Your mother finally decided to join us." "Good morning," I said, taking my seat across the table. A servant appeared and placed breakfast in front of me, but I found my appetite lacking with the news of yet another social dinner. "We have an important dinner tonight, if I'm able to arrange it. The Oliver brothers are in Silver City and have finally agreed to see me after years of trying with their father. Perhaps the younger Olivers are more open to new paths. Suffice to say, these next few weeks could greatly impact my business and future. My son's. His, not ours, as if I'd not had a part in it somehow." "That's wonderful," I said, picking through my food. "I need you to make a good impression tonight. Can I count on you for that?" "I will do my best for you," I said. "Your best isn't what I need, Tabitha. You are my wife. I need to be able to rely on you." "I understand," I said. "Do you?" he asked, raising his voice. He raised his fist, intent on slamming it against the table, but stopped just short. He realized in time that it would startle Benjamin. Instead, he relaxed that same fist and gently tapped the boy on the nose, prompting a giggle. "I do," I said. I understood all too well what was expected of me. I could put on a mask of any kind in front of others, but still struggled to do it in front of Frederick. At first, I thought it would require practice, but after years of practice, I've realized something different. There just isn't any way to make the man happy. He is never satisfied with anything. Often praised as a perfectionist by those who admired his business success, no one saw what that need for control looked like at home. Good. As I said, a lot is riding on this. I don't need you sabotaging this opportunity for me with incompetence, deliberate or otherwise. "I won't disappoint you," I said, forcing a smile this time, hoping that, by complete chance, that was the proper way to appease him this time. He handed Benjamin off to a servant, and I held out my arms to take him before Frederick shook his head. "Not yet," he scolded. "Not until she's finished her breakfast properly. Benjamin's stomach hasn't been settled lately. My wife needs to understand she's eating for two." I wanted to argue that if he'd ever offer the food I requested, then maybe I'd eat more. But there was no arguing with a man who knew better than everyone else about everything. Instead, I simply did what I always did. I shoved food in my mouth, bite after bite. Because that's what was expected of me. What they saw was obedience. What I felt was survival, and I chose survival every time.
Chapter 3. Edward Oliver. Harold shut the door to our hotel room after accepting a note that had been delivered to us. He read it quietly, then looked at me with an expression that told me I should brace myself. "You'll never guess who invited us to an impromptu dinner tonight," he said, grinning. "I'm not surprised. He's been eyeing a contract with Continental Railroad for a long time. I'm more surprised he didn't come over here and deliver the message himself. At least he managed that much restraint." "This is leverage," Harold said. "We've done our homework on the man, just as I'm sure he has on us. The fact he couldn't even wait until tomorrow shows how desperate he is." "Or how desperate he wants to appear," I corrected. Harold sat down next to me and nodded. "Yeah, I guess you're right. Bet you never thought your experience with outlaws would matter so much in such supposedly dignified company." "No. I always knew men like this were worse. Nothing about dealing with him is going to be easy. And the moment he has us thinking, that is the moment he has us over a barrel. You're not wrong, but I still think you give the man too much credit." "Let's hope so," I said, standing and adjusting my tie in the mirror. Arriving at the restaurant also felt daunting. Stepping out of the carriage, I immediately wished we'd just walked the entire way instead. All this sitting and jostling around, combined with the weather, had my leg aching worse than it had in a while. The doorman approached us with an empty smile, flipping through his notepad. "Under what name is your reservation?" Harold grinned at me as if I'd be just as amused as he was. It was a habit of his, wanting me to share the joke even when I didn't know what it was yet. He did it whenever he thought someone ought to know something without being told. Harold and Edward Oliver. I believe Frederick Bell made the reservation. Ah, yes. Mr. Bell reserved a private section. He has also informed us he'd be taking care of the bill for any guests he invited tonight. Please make yourselves at home at the Painted Moose. We nodded and stepped inside, making it all of 10 steps before another attendant intercepted us. I was already growing tired of this city's practiced pleasantries, though Harold seemed to love the attention. "Right this way, gentlemen." He paused for a moment, studying how I leaned on my cane. "Do you require assistance, Mr. Oliver?" "Did I ask for any?" I snapped. Too fast, too sharp, and already past taking back. Harold raised his eyebrows, grinning again. The same grin for the same reason. "Apologies," the waiter said, bowing his head. "Right this way." We followed briefly before being led into a large private room. Several men were standing around chatting, not yet sitting at their tables. I was immediately relieved because I wasn't ready to sit again. A few more minutes of standing, ironically, felt great at the moment. "You must be the Oliver brothers," a thin man said, approaching us with a broad grin plastered across his face. A good liar knows a good liar when he sees one. His smile was polished, practiced, and a little too eager. Rarely did good men live behind one. "Mr. Bell," Harold said, smiling and shaking his hand enthusiastically, one of those rare good men behind a fake smile. "It's been a while. I'm impressed you recognized me. You've not yet met my brother, have you? This is Edward." I did not smile, finding it easier to keep my expression consistently annoyed and grim. Gerald Oliver wore much the same expression, and I found it suited me as well. I reached out to shake his hand with a firmness that lacked my brother's enthusiasm. "A pleasure, Mr. Bell," I said. "You know, he favors Gerald quite a bit," he said, addressing Harold. "Your half-brother, right?" "That's right," Harold said. That was the story we'd settled on. An affair, hidden for decades. A mistake Gerald Oliver sought to make right in his older years after keeping the whole sordid mess quiet in his youth, at the behest of his late wife, of course. Though I don't see the man as my half-brother. Twice that, at least. I very much needed a big brother all my life to keep me straight, Mr. Bell. And at last I have one. God has not made the man who can keep you straight, I said, laughing briefly. Bell joined in. Suddenly it felt a bit more natural. All the practice had apparently paid off. Harold threw an arm over my shoulder. True. I'd expected Frederick Bell to look like a villain, maybe because I'd always imagined him as one. Now that I was seeing him for the first time, it was easy to see how others found him charming. He was thin, with gaunt features. His black hair was slicked back, with small streaks of gray running up each side. His blue eyes lit up each time he smiled, and he did seem to smile a lot. Just then a woman walked up beside us. My heart nearly stopped, thinking it might be Tabitha. I didn't recognize this woman. Your wife say I bring Ben to you, Mr. Bell. She come in more minute, but soon. Bell's eye twitched in annoyance, but his expression quickly recovered. Well, now that was a fine idea on her part. Thank you, Camilla. Frederick reached out, taking the small boy into his arms with the gentleness of a loving father. Nothing seemed fake about that. She knows I love showing off my son to anyone I can trap in the same room. He smiled even more broadly than before, making various noises at the boy until he finally giggled, pleasing his father into somehow managing an even bigger smile. "No kidding. This is your son, Mr. Bell?" Harold asked, leaning forward and gently pinching the boy's cheek. "Those are some mighty fine blonde locks the boy has at such a young age." "Inherited from his beautiful mother," Bell said. What should have incited anger brought instead a strange relief. This was the monster I'd been fearing had held Tabitha captive the past 2 years. The same man who sent a gunslinging demon like Samuel Morrison after her. And now, "You seem to have quite a bond with your son," I said. It wasn't one of the lines I'd practiced in my head, but a genuine observation. Maybe none of this was necessary. Maybe she was happy, living the life she deserved with a man who was good enough for her. Not a killer on his third name. It hurt almost as bad as it soothed my vengeful heart. I looked to Harold, who seemed to understand. He nodded to me, squeezing his arm around my shoulder just a bit tighter before returning it to his side. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for this boy," Bell said, looking almost as though he'd become emotional. "Please, gentlemen. My wife should be here soon. Go ahead and look over the menu. I'm sure the staff informed you. It's my treat tonight. Business can wait until tomorrow. Tonight we're just men getting to know one another a bit better." Harold and I took our seats, along with some of the other guests I didn't know. Harold seemed to know some of them and was already making small talk. I leaned back in my chair, finding myself breathing a sigh of great relief. Maybe this mission I'd built up in my mind was nothing more than a fairy tale I'd been telling myself to justify my fantasy of swooping back in and saving the woman I only too late realized how much I loved. Another woman walked in. At first I thought she was another stranger, but another look made me realize her hair was much longer than before, and even though she'd been a slender woman previously, she was now even thinner. She smiled when she walked into the room, but I'd seen a genuine smile on this woman's face before, and this wasn't one. "Come, dear. I've saved you a seat," Bell said. She approached him and then sat next to him. He reached under the table, believing his hand was hidden, and I was certain he grabbed her arm. She tensed, and I could see the pain on her face. "Aren't you forgetting something?" "Of course," she said, leaning over to kiss him on the lips. Harold hadn't noticed the grab, but I certainly did. Maybe I was imagining it, or this was an off day. Every couple fought sometimes. Every hard-won instinct told me the man wasn't worth the bullet it would take to liberate the world from him. But my heart wanted him to be decent. As the dinner went on, small talk continued amongst all the men at the table. Tabitha would occasionally smile as her son played in her lap. Then, just as we were about to end the night, Benjamin knocked over a glass of water. Tabitha went pale. Bell stood so fast his chair scraped, his hand already drawing back. Tabitha gasped, shrinking in her chair, then slowly relaxed when he didn't strike. She sat frozen for a heartbeat before reaching for a cloth with a trembling hand and wiping Benjamin's clothes. Bell muttered something under his breath. I wasn't sure what, but I could tell it wasn't kind. "Take him and get him changed," Bell said, restoring his smile with a concerning amount of effort and patting Tabitha gently on the shoulder. She tensed again, quickly hopping to her feet and escaping the room. Without my even realizing it, Harold's hand settled on the back of my neck, steady, firm, a warning and an anchor all at once. My mind was elsewhere. I became aware of my clenched fists and relaxed them. Harold was looking at me and smiling. After a moment, I realized he was subtly reminding me to smile as well. I did, what little I could manage. "I hope you'll not take offense to my saying so, Mr. Bell, but that's one beautiful wife you have there. You're a lucky man." Harold said. Bell did seem to take offense for a moment, almost as swept up in his own anger as I was. At least that seemed to prevent him from noticing mine. Not at all. A man compliments my wife, and it only shows he has good taste. She's young and has a lot to learn, but she's adjusting. "Please excuse us, Mr. Bell," I said, trying and failing to relax my clenched jaw. "My leg has been acting up since we arrived, and I'd like to take a walk. My brother may stay longer." "Apologies to Mr. Bell here, but I did say I wanted to show you around," Harold said, patting me hard on the back. "Please excuse us, Mr. Bell, and thank you very much for your hospitality. We look forward to seeing you more during our stay." "Of course," Frederick Bell said, bowing his head before returning to his seat. "Have a good night, gentlemen." As I left the room, I nearly tripped in my haste. "Deep breath," Harold said once we'd exited the room. "Don't tell me to calm down, Harold," I snapped. "I didn't," he said. I took a deep breath, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Right, you didn't. Sorry." "Forget it," he said. "Let's go take our minds off things for a bit. We can talk more about this back at the hotel."
Chapter 4. Tabitha Bell. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the bruise already appearing on my wrist. The ones on my forearms were easier to hide, more so the ones on my upper arms. A bruise on the hand or wrist required gloves or makeup. When we'd gotten home from dinner, he went over the lengthy list of things I'd done wrong in great detail. I didn't arrive early enough. I didn't greet the Olivers properly or with enough enthusiasm. I held Benjamin too close to the table. I had the water too close to the edge. I could have grabbed it before he hit it. I could have caught it. I could have thrown a cloth on it faster. I should have apologized quickly when it happened. The list went on, and then on some more. A soft knock at my door was a welcome distraction from my spiraling thoughts. "Come in," I said, hoping it was Camilla. Camilla entered, closing the door quietly behind her. She didn't say anything at first, just sat next to me and placed an arm around my shoulder. "He was in a good mood a short while ago," she said, "with Benjamin." "He's always in a good mood with Benjamin," I said. "You should rest. Tomorrow is likely to be another long day." "The Oliver brothers?" "Yes?" she asked, tilting her head. "Did you see them at dinner?" "I did briefly when I dropped off Benjamin to Frederick. Why?" I hesitated because it felt like a stupid question. There was something familiar about them. "You've never met the Olivers, have you?" "I believe Frederick has only met them a couple of times himself, and it was before you and he were married. In fact, this is his first time meeting Edward." "Right. You're right. I could barely look at them throughout the entire dinner because I was so focused on Benjamin." "Is there anything specific that made them seem familiar to you?" I shook my head, feeling sillier by the moment. No, I suppose not. If anything comes to mind, you can share it with me. Otherwise, you should get some rest. You've had a long day." That night, I dreamed of Tom Rowland. When I first arrived, I thought of him always. It gave me hope. After a few weeks, a bit less. Months, even less. Now I didn't think of him so often. When I did, it only brought pain. There was no longer any hope there. Even if there was, I didn't dare accept it. He was probably still there, working for Uncle Marcus. Not that I'd know. Uncle had written me letters, but Frederick refused them and asked they no longer be delivered here. I'd have never known about them if not for Camilla. She'd planned to intercept one for me had they kept coming, except they no longer did. No one came to visit, or if they had, they'd received the same treatment as the letters. I believe they're interested in making a deal, Frederick said from across the breakfast table, scooping eggs into his mouth with enthusiasm. This is the most open they've been in years, and that family rarely makes deals with anyone. I'd all but given up, deciding that Gerald must have held some strange grudge against me for a past slight. That's great news, I said. More than just good news, he scoffed. If we can secure a deal with the railroad, it'll change everything. No one will be able to compete with us anywhere in the state. Not just the state, but maybe this half of the country. A reduction in transport cost? Well, I'd be happy with just that. But if we could negotiate some kind of exclusivity agreement, maybe if I agreed to invest in supplying numbers for new tracks, we'd become an empire within the decade. Imagine it. Prefab home lumber kits ordered from Bell Lumber Company, delivered to their local railroad depot. Our catalogs could sit on the counter of every hardware store in the country. That would be a dream come true, I said, forcing as much enthusiasm as I could. At the very least, Benjamin would benefit from all this. That said, I'll warn you to behave modestly around Harold Oliver. His reputation with women isn't a good one, and I'd rather him not have eyes on my wife. I've seen what an interest in a beautiful woman can do to a man. He paused. Especially when that woman is married. You're my husband, I said, and I hope that's clear to him or anyone else. I kept my response simple, but he seemed to be pleased by it. Good. I believe I've misjudged your performance at last night's dinner too harshly. My performance. He kept referring to it that way, as if I were just another employee. Thank you, I said. Though next time, I'd like you to be more engaged. Men like to be asked questions about themselves, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to learn more about these men. They're much less likely to see it as prying for information through the lens of a woman's innocent curiosity. Of course, I said. Are you feeling well? He asked, narrowing his eyes. He'd likely gotten annoyed by my short answers, but short answers were safer. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. I'd especially like to know more about Edward. I had my people do a bit of digging, and what turned up was completely unremarkable. Is that not a good thing? I asked. Few men in Edward Oliver's position get there by being unremarkable, even when birth opens the door. When I shook the man's hand, it felt like a working man's hand. Years don't erase that. It just makes me curious. Anything that can be learned about a man can be used to persuade him. I wonder what kind of life he lived while being swept under the rug along with his father's affair. We can't seem to find anyone who claims to have known him. Only records. Gerald was especially careful with concealing his son's past, but that only makes me want to know about him more. Is there anything in particular you'd like me to ask him? Simple things, like what his childhood was like, or his favorite hobbies as a young man. He's a quiet man, and learning these things about him isn't going to be easy. I already know a lot about Harold, and I've already made arrangements to play into that man's strengths and weaknesses. I didn't ask. I already knew about Harold's reputation, and was only thankful he'd not decided I should play some part in exploiting it. I see, I said. Edward's only been brought into the Oliver family for a couple of years, and he's already running a large portion of their operations alongside his brother. Despite Harold's faults, he's a savvy businessman, but I'd like to know what kind of man can be brought up to speed in just a few short years. That's a man with weaknesses I need to discover in order to secure the best arrangement benefiting our son's future. Don't you agree? I do agree. And I was thankful he'd at least made an effort to refer to Benjamin as our son, rather than simply his. I'll do my best to support our family, I added. As he stood to leave the table, he smiled. Good. And that starts with our son's health. You've left your plate unfinished yet again. Please finish it before leaving the table. I understand. I dug in my spoon, churning through the last of the eggs remaining on my plate. "I'll finish it all." He smiled, and as he walked by, he placed a kiss on the top of my head. I flinched but felt only relief. It was so unusual for him to even pretend at affection. Even when we were trying for a baby, he treated it as a cold but necessary process. This kiss was probably one of fewer than a dozen I'd received from the man since knowing him. I forced a smile in return. The kindness didn't comfort me. It only made me more careful.
Chapter 5. Edward Oliver. For a while I thought Harold and I were going to get to enjoy a normal breakfast without much need for conversation. I appreciated my brother's company, of course, but we both knew he liked talking a whole lot more than I did. "This bacon's not half bad," Harold said. "They use iron," I said, raising my eyebrow to punctuate a point I'd made roughly a year prior. Harold insisted on upgrading to copper cookware in the kitchen, only to complain afterward that everything tasted different. One day, Gerald brought the chef in to speak to Harold directly and very angrily. He was a German man who didn't speak the best English, but Harold seemed to understand the German words fine when spoken a certain way. He stopped meddling in the kitchen after that. Gerald's lesson was clear. Leave work you don't understand to the experts who do. "I deserved that," he said, grinning. A young man approached our table looking like he'd been chased. "Apologies, but you are the Oliver brothers, correct?" We nodded at the same time, worried about the boy's demeanor. "Oh, good. I've been looking for you. There's been an urgent telegram. I'll wait while you read it." Harold nodded to me, and I unfolded the paper to read it. My face went pale. "What? What's happened?" Harold asked, craning his neck to glimpse the paper. "One of our trains got robbed this morning. 3 cars were hit. The message is from Green Creek Station." I slammed the paper down, drawing glances from the other diners. "Any deaths or injuries?" Harold asked. "Unfortunately, they didn't think that was important enough to include in the telegram," I said. "They may not have known when they sent it. Then they should have waited until they had answers before sending it." Harold took a paper from the clerk and began writing out a response with specific, direct questions. Our first concerns were whether anyone had been hurt or killed, but also asking for a clear inventory of what had been taken and written statements from each passenger with our assurance they'd be followed up with and made whole. He handed it to the clerk, who hurried off. Suddenly the image of the young man clutching at his chest filled my mind. Images like these faded over time, but sometimes they returned with startling clarity. I could see the light shining off his coppery hair, the line of blood running from the corner of his mouth, the smell of smoke from my gun. Bile rose in my throat, and I covered my mouth, barely containing the rush. I reached for my drink, only to spill it on the table. Harold jumped up from his chair, grabbing me under the arm and helping me to my feet, snatching up my cane with the other hand. He led me toward the exit. Once outside, I doubled over, spilling the contents of my breakfast onto the ground. "Maybe that bacon wasn't so good after all," he said, patting me on the back. I managed to smile, but it wasn't easy. "Guess not. I'm going to go for a walk, and I'll meet you back at the hotel in a bit." "Want some company?" "No. One of us needs to be available for the next telegram. I need to clear my head for a bit." "You're not the same man, Ed," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I appreciated Harold. In some ways he was right, but a man's sins don't disappear when he changes his name. Regret can only take him so far, even if he's forgiven, by the ones he's wronged or by God. Sometimes the damage he's caused can't be undone. The dead can never be brought back to life. As usual, the right words felt out of reach. I simply nodded and began walking. Despite the surge of bad memories, my leg felt good today. The pain was manageable and the cane was hardly necessary, though it was welcome for a long walk. I barely gave any attention to the businesses I passed by, sticking to a straight line all the way to the edge of the town. It was called Silver City, but I'd heard of cities far bigger. I guess as much money as this place brought in, it just felt improper to call it a town. There weren't many people out this way. Normally, I paid more attention. Today, my mind was elsewhere. "Hey there, cowboy," the man said, raising the brim of his hat. He sported a big grin, reaching for his belt. My hand instinctively went to mine, despite nothing being there. He, thankfully, had nothing on his belt either. Instead, his hand went into his pants pocket and pulled out a small case. He pulled a cigarette from it, struck a match, and lit it. "Cigarette?" "No, thank you, Mr. Morrison. You should have spoken up earlier if you had something you wished to speak with me about." "Apologies for leading you so far out of the way," I said. "Nonsense," he said, taking a long draw. I noticed the slight tremble in his left arm. "It's fine that people see us speaking, but I thought you might appreciate them not hearing the conversation. You're looking good for a man that had been shot through the head. Gotta say, I don't think I've ever seen anyone survive that. I've got a working theory." He paused, tapping his eye patch over his right eye. "I reckon that shot must have been a little off on account of looking down the barrel with my non-dominant eye." "That's my theory too," I said. "Come to finish the job?" He laughed, nearly dropping his cigarette from his lips. "I finished that job a long time ago, cowboy. What was between us ended then." "Not sore about eye and arm?" He laughed again. "Not sore about that rattle I gave your brain and the busted leg?" "Fair trade, I'd say." "You were just doing your job," I said. He nodded, though his expression became a bit more serious. "And you were just trying to save the woman you loved, I reckon." "Love, I should say. It's the real reason why you're here now, if I had to guess." "Going to tell your boss?" "Why would I? Job never had anything to do with you. I just make sure no one stopped her from getting to Frederick. And she got there fine." "You don't sound too happy with your employer," I said. "Yeah? Well, I'm not, but that's not really any of your business, is it, Mr. Oliver?" He took another long draw from his cigarette. "Seeing you just made me curious, like seeing a ghost. Or even worse, a dead man come back to life. Now that I've seen you up close, my curiosity is satisfied. Good day to you, Mr. Oliver." He dropped what little was left of his cigarette to the ground, grinding it beneath the heel of his boot. As he turned, a crazy thought burst into my mind. Crazy enough I knew I ought to think twice before speaking it, but I might not have another opportunity to speak to the man again like this. "Ever thought about switching professions?" I asked. "Seems we've got a robbery problem cropping up, and I want to end it before it gets any worse. I'm not looking for a man to pull a trigger, only to make sure no one else ever feels the need to." He stopped in his tracks, spinning around and looking at me, dumbfounded and mouth hanging open. He laughed, stopped, then laughed again. "You ain't serious," he said. "I believe you know that I am," I said. "I've seen what you can do personally. Think it over. I'd like to conclude business with Frederick Bell before moving forward with any kind of arrangement between you and me, but you have my word. As you'd imagine, Continental Railroad is very competitive with our compensation. I've no doubt we can match or beat your current salary. On second thought, I might have the wrong guy after all. That man may very well be dead." "Men change," I said. He nodded. "Some men. Not all. I'll think about it." Without another word, he kept walking. Something told me I had nothing to worry about. A man like that was a professional, and it sounded like there was no loyalty to be found between him and his employer. I suspected there was a reason for that, and it would benefit me to find out what that reason was. But for now, I was relieved. The one man I knew would recognize me first wouldn't be an obstacle. I didn't know what recognizing me would cost Tabitha.
If you're enjoying our audio content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.